3 weeks away into the Rugby World Cup, and I thought here at the sports booth it was time to do a bit of a deep dive into how if I was the general governing body, the decider, the judge, jury, executioner, would set up a Rugby World Cup. Because I would make some slight changes just in the way I think the tournament's set up, and to more globalise it, don't know if that's a word, but I've used it, and to build it into probably the second biggest or third biggest sporting event in the world. Currently, the Rugby World Cup, I think, ranks about 8th or 9th in the world of events. You know, you've got Football World Cup, obviously, then the Olympics, summer and winter. I know Tour de France knocks in a lot of numbers, Cricket World Cup, and I even think the Women's Football World Cup is higher than the men's rugby tournament. So I'm trying to really globalise this tournament and make it the best tournament. Ideally trying to compete. Obviously, we will never be able to compete with the Football World Cup, but get it up there. It's already a monumental tournament, but how can we make it better? Now, I've touched base in this video. I'm going to put the thumbnail somewhere around there on how the draw kind of has already mucked up this Rugby World Cup, and I'll touch quickly on the draw. Done way too early, basically. Draw needs to be done later, so we have, I guess, I don't want to say fairer pools, but more evenly matched pools, a more evenly matched draw. We won't see the top 5 teams in the world currently in rankings be knocked out before the semi-finals, or only 2 teams from the top 5 teams making the semi-finals. We then, on this video, this thumbnail right here, if you want to watch that, see how I think banning players in the Owen Farrell saga is taking a toll on World Rugby and the event as a whole, so I'm going to touch base quickly on that. But let's get into kind of how I'm going to grow this tournament. First thing I'm going to do, sort out the draw. Draw is now done 6 months in advance. Sort out the qualification for it so that the qualification is a little bit smoother. I didn't mind it, but I just think the way the last kind of tournament was set up with like Tonga, Hong Kong, Kenya, someone else, it was just seemed a bit strange. I would have liked to see a smooth progression, and I don't mind if it is like very similar to the Football World Cup, where a certain number of nations play and then bam, 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 and then the final qualification happens. It just seems weird that we were doing the draw before you've had all the teams qualify. So I'd rather have teams qualify and then do the draw 6 months, maybe 9 months in advance, so the final qualification happens a year in advance. On to now expanding the tournament. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me on this point, and I get that. I totally understand it. I was iffy, I would say, about this point, but I'm expanding it to 32 teams to match the Football World Cup. Football World Cup's about to expand even more. I think rugby tournament should expand. 8 pools of 4, so we're still in virtue playing the same amount of games because you play 3 pool games, then we have a round of 16, then a quarterfinal, semi-final, final. So you'll only ever max play 7 games if you go through, and it just means that all those pool games are vital. Top 2 from each pool goes through. We have our round of 16. If we were to do the draw right now and, you know, take the top 32 teams in the world, this is how it would look. And what I've done is I've just based it on 1, so that 1 to 8 and then 9 to 16. So a pool A would look like Ireland, obviously ranked number 1, Fiji 9th, Uruguay, and then Russia. Pool B would be New Zealand, All Blacks, Wales, USA, the Netherlands. Pool C would be France, Georgia, Romania, and Switzerland. Pool D would be South Africa, Samoa, Spain, and Brazil. Pool E would be Scotland, Italy, Namibia, and Belgium. Pool F would be England, Japan, Chile, and Korea. Pool G would be Argentina, Tonga, Canada, and Zimbabwe. And Pool H would be Australia, Portugal, Hong Kong, and Germany. Now, obviously, what you do is top 8 band and then a 9 to 16 band and so on and so forth. So you wouldn't have it exactly like that, but I've just done it for an example, what I would like to see happen, and we can see kind of the pictures of the pools. To me, people will be arguing the point against this because there'll be more blowouts. There won't be as many competitive games. To me, I disagree. I think, yes, there may be slightly bigger blowout scores. You know, Australia versus Germany might blow out to more than what an Australia versus Portugal would be. But to me, we're losing, obviously, some commercial value in USA and Canada not being there. And those countries being there, it benefits their rugby ability and their rugby growth in their respective nations. So Germany or Hong Kong or a Zimbabwe, you know, going to a Rugby World Cup would be the epitome of them, and playing against a team like Argentina, who in this has been in their pool, would just be fantastic. And you'd have teams trying to qualify, so you may not have just the top 32 teams, you'd have teams missing out, obviously, like we did with USA and Canada this World Cup. So I like the idea of expansion, more teams, more eyes on the game. Yes, you may get slightly bigger blowouts, but gone are the days that we'll see the 140, 150 nils, I think, because teams aren't looking to accomplish that. Back in the day when we had Rugby World Cups, teams were just looking to score points, score tries, run up the scoreboard. Now teams, when they play those minnow nations, they're looking to execute. You look at, the last World Cup, or 2015 specifically, I remember New Zealand being very methodical with their process against those teams. They were looking to play their game plan, then win by 150 points. And even with them winning by 100 points, if we look back at, the New Zealand versus Portugal game, which I believe was 108-13, the fantastic stories that you get from Portugal scoring a try against the mighty All Blacks. Imagine, someone in a Zimbabwe team losing 100-0 to the All Blacks and they score a try to give them 105. It's not all about just winning at the Rugby World Cup, and that's what rugby's about. It's about the sport. And you'll get those stories, you'll get those moments, your Japan versus South Africa, where an Uruguay versus Fiji at the last World Cup, where a Zimbabwe may upset a Canada, and you just sit there and you're gobsmacked that that's happened, and what that does for that rugby nation. To me, it just makes a lot of sense. Expand it to 32 teams. I think it's a great global pitch for the game. We've got 32. I think there's about 128 nations that play. So it's not like it's only a quarter of the nations that are playing, and it starts to, I think, compete with the Football World Cup a bit more. Lastly, and I'm just touching on this because I think, as Andy Farrell put it, the circus that's gone around Owen Farrell, I've made a video on it. I think he should have been banned, but I actually think there's a better way to do this, and now this, I think, will create a bit more arguments, but I don't want to see the top players missing out on the Rugby World Cup. I don't think anybody wants to see that. I don't want to see Owen Farrell missing it. I certainly don't want to see George Moala missing the Rugby World Cup. So I've come up with an idea, readily used in the rugby league world. Why not fine them? You make a bad tackle, you can either pay a fine or take a ban. Now, the big argument here is it's going to help, obviously, the countries that have more money. My guarantee is if Owen Farrell gets a fine of $40,000 to not miss any games, and he goes on to win the Rugby World Cup, I believe there will be some sliding of the money into Owen Farrell's pocket. And I can understand that. I can get that. I want to come up with a way where we don't see players banned for the Rugby World Cup. Or in general, like, we want to see them on the field, yes, if they've done wrong. Like, in all essence, as bad as Owen's Farrell tackle kind of was, like, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened on a rugby field. He hasn't thrown a punch. He isn't. It was a bad tackle, and he's known as he's had a few bad tackles, but it's definitely not like, I wouldn't go out and say Owen Farrell's a dirty player. He's got a poor tackle technique. I agree with that, and he's made some poor decisions. But as we can sit there and we can say George Moala's tackle was a poor decision. So to me, we've got to find out a way to stop players missing the World Cup and to stop this argument. Like, I would just not want to play any of my players in a warm-up fixture if I know that they've got the opportunity to miss a Rugby World Cup fixture. Like, obviously injuries happen, but when it comes to bans, like, it just to me makes no sense. We want the best players at the pinnacle of our game, so we need to find a way. So I think the fine system works well, and I don't mind if we go, you know what, for a tier 1 nation, this is the fine, and for a tier 2 nation, this is the fine, and we make it equal so that we can go, yes, there's value in this. And even if we don't find the player themselves and we find the nation or the rugby board, so for England would get fined if it happens to an All Black, the New Zealanders get fined, if you know what I mean. So I just want to find a way to keep the best players at the Rugby World Cup. I then want to expand the tournament to 32 teams, and I want to get the draw right, and I think we've got one hell of a tournament on our hands. Well, anyway, World Rugby's doing it their way for the 2023 World Cup, but just some ideas for maybe the 2027 World Cup. I think Australia would be a great place to expand it to 32 teams, to really hone down that ability to grow the game. I'd love to go to a Zimbabwe Korea game at like Leichhardt. Imagine that, you know, a nitty-gritty venue just for the World Cup. I know it won't ever happen because they'll put them at Allianz, but how cool would that be? But yeah, I would love to hear your ideas of how to improve the Rugby World Cup, how you may organise the Rugby World Cup. But for now, I've been Luke from the Sports Booth. Make sure you click that subscribe button and like the video if you enjoy. For now, I will see you later.